April 10th, 1979, is a day remembered for the Red River Valley tornado outbreak. It is commonly known as Terrible Tuesday.
We had a warning that there was likely to be severe weather. National Weather Service had begun talking about it early in the day. Of course, almost 40 years ago, you didn't have the weather technology or expertise that you have now. So we weren't going to get as specific a warning or early a warning as we would nowadays. But by early afternoon, the Weather Service had put the Wichita Falls area in a tornado watch.
The outbreak of 3 supercell thunderstorms produced 13 tornadoes that touched down from North Texas to Oklahoma. 2 of the tornadoes were classified as F4 tornadoes, the second highest rating that could be given at that time. One hit Vernon, Texas, and the other hit Wichita Falls.
I don't know exactly what time it was, probably 5 after 6 or so. My sister called and told me, she said, we we being my sister, my brother-in-law, and my niece, are in the tornado shelter at my brother-in-law's parents' home, and we have Mom, and we want you to come over and be in the shelter with us because something's happening. Big storms headed our way, we're just not comfortable. I said, okay. And I said, as I was talking to her, I looked out the window. And about that time, it kind of all happened simultaneously. Rich Siegel was on the news saying, there's been a tornado spotted. And I looked out the window by the fireplace and it was solid black. I could not see anything that looked like a tornado. I could just see a solid black sky. And I told her, she said, come on. And I said, sister, I'm sorry, I think it's 2, and the phone cut off. I didn't even get to finish my sentence. About that time, I watched both my cars, a 1965 Chevrolet Impala, a 1975 Buick LeSabre, come up off the ground, and it was as if a magician had levitated them. They came up off the ground about 8 inches and just stood there and shook until eventually the Buick kind of flipped up in the air, bounced off the fireplace, and that was the time I turned around and started running for the bathtub. It was on us. And at that time, when I started running for the bathtub, we had not heard the sirens yet. It almost, again, simultaneously with getting to the bathroom and starting to get in the tub, the sirens occurred.
This is Bill Warren, TV3 Weather. The National Weather Service has issued a tornado warning for Wichita County. The Wichita County, including the city of Wichita Falls and the parking lot, is in a tornado warning from now until 6 o'clock. The tornado has been spotted.
There was no train sound. It was just a hard wind, and it felt like at the beach when the sand hits you and when you're out on the beach. And I remember that. And it was roaring. It was loud wind. It didn't seem to last as long as it could have been. I don't know. It just went through. Little did I know, my mother lifted her head up and she kept looking around. And she told me later on that it was so weird and neat because she would see a little bitty cloud spinning and then a real big cloud spinning. And she said there was all this motion going on, but something flew up and hit her in the back of the head, back behind her. It wasn't anything major. But before the wind died down, we could hear this piece of some kind of metal coming down. It would look like the front of an old pickup, something. And it stopped before it got to that end of that ditch. Then I remember the big hail falling for just a few minutes. And then my dad yelled at everybody, stay put, in this really demanding voice. I never heard my dad yell. And he got out and he said at that point it was tearing up the mall after it passed. It curved right about where we were. And he yelled at everybody, stay off the power lines, do not touch any wires, be careful, don't touch them, they could be live. And I remember him yelling that. And my mom looked up at him and says, is everything gone? And he said, everything. And that's when I lost it. I didn't lose it until that point. And I started screaming, and he says, come on, let's go. And I had to drag me out of the ditch, which I was barefooted as always in the summer. And so the only injury I sustained was a cut of piece of glass in the ditch. But we walked out of the ditch, and it was like they said, the war zone. It was so devastated that you didn't know where you were. And there was this particular smell. It lingered for weeks. You smell immediately. It was a smell of like wet wood and just like mold or something. And from time to time, when it rains to this day, if I'll catch a little glimpse, smell of that smell, it'll send me right back.
At about 1 mile wide, the tornado devastated the southwest part of Wichita Falls. The tornado first touched down at Memorial Stadium and was on the ground for at least 30 miles.
And we got to the neighbor's cellar, and right as I'm going into the cellar, I look up and I see this blackness, just total blackness, and just a rumbling train coming. And it was like I was mesmerized. I couldn't hardly move. But they shoved us into the storm cellar because I remember shuffling us all in. There was about 8 of us in that storm cellar. And my stepdad was just about to pull the rope down and wrap it around his hand when the storm hit. And it jerked the door off. And I was underneath. Again, I was mesmerized because you could see everything just like, it's just amazing how everything was just going. I was trying to think of the movie that Wizard of Oz, kind of like you were, just everything was just kind of like swirling. I was 14, I was curious, not even thinking the danger that I was in because the storm door came up. And so I could see up, and I was like close to the door. And they said, this is dangerous, so they pulled me out, because we're not thinking about what destruction it could do. We never would have imagined what a tornado was back then, And I just remember looking up and just seeing blurs of stuff and color and not really seeing objects, just stuff. I don't know what it was. It could have been the wires. It could have been, parts of the house. There was the cellar that we were in, where it was right next to another house. Their house was totally gone, with not even hardly any debris.
Well, I guess like everybody says, it was like a war zone. We went over to our house, and some friends came over there trying to help us pick up things, that we could. And I remember this couple that were in this big station wagon. They were actually on a temporary assignment to Shepherd. And in the back of that station wagon, they had a big pot of pinto beans, and they had cornbread and fresh green onions and iced tea. And they were just driving up and down the street and giving people bowls of these beans and stuff. And, that's one of the best meals I've ever had. It was just, they were just so kind and so sweet. I don't have any idea what their names were, never even thought about getting it, but I think it brought out the very best in people, and I think that in a lot of cases it brought out the very worst in people. There was, some looting, I think, at the mall and, and different things. There's always somebody that's going to take advantage when people are at their lowest, and I think we saw that happen. But our situation and what we were exposed to was the best in people. We actually had to say, don't give us anything else, give it to somebody else, because we just received so much that we didn't need anymore. And so we had to, reroute some things to stuff. So, but anyway, it was quite an experience. Wish I'd have moved about 2 weeks sooner. So,
I think one of the things about the Wichita Falls tornado of 1979 is meteorologists and scientists learned a great deal from that. Number one, that tornado verified what they had suspected for a long time. It was not a single tornado. It was a multi-vortex tornado with one large tornado at the center and other tornadoes spinning around it, wrapping around it. And photographs of the Wichita Falls tornado show that. You can actually see them. And then when they did damage assessments from the air, it was also obvious too, because you would have a large area of houses obliterated, and then there would be houses standing, and then you'd have some more houses obliterated. So the damage path proved that it was actually multiple tornadoes that hit Wichita Falls, all descending from the same thunderstorm. Another lesson that came from Wichita Falls was the danger of cars, because so many of the people who were killed or injured in the Wichita Falls tornado had been in cars. You know, it hit at 6 o'clock in the evening on a Tuesday. A lot of people were still going home, going about their business. And that large tornado, when it came, they had no way to get out of the way because of other traffic, which was going wild because of buildings and so forth. So a lot of them were helpless in the cars. And a great deal of information was disseminated thereafter saying it's better not to be trapped in your car in a tornado, but to get out of the car and try to get safety in a fortified building or even in a ditch.
According to NOAA Dr. Ted Fujita, a tornado researcher from the University of Chicago, for whom the Fujita scale is named, said the damage path of the Wichita Falls tornado was among the widest he'd ever seen. More than 1,700 people were injured and about 6,000 families were left homeless in Wichita Falls. The final estimate of property damage was $700 million.
Well, probably one of the first challenges was the fact that a lot of untrue rumors surfaced. I recall that rumors surfaced around town that the death toll was much higher than it was, that an armory was just filled with bodies. Of course, that wasn't true. You know, nobody would try to suppress that kind of information. There was some looting. I don't think it was ever widespread. There was some price gouging that went on, especially at some gas stations in town, because fuel was in short supply, and the city put out the word, you're going to be prosecuted if you do this. So I don't think it was widespread. The city did seem like a war zone for a few days, especially at night, because helicopters were brought in, National Guard helicopters, and you could hear them through the night in the sky, and they were shining the searchlights down. And the recovery effort from that tornado seemed like it just took forever. Federal government came in, the Small Business Administration and FEMA, Federal Emergency Management, came in. They began bringing in the trailer houses. Thousands of people were displaced. I think the number of structures that were destroyed or damaged beyond immediate repair was more than 5,000 structures. In a city the size of Wichita Falls, that's a lot of homes to be destroyed. And you can look at a map of the tornado track and see that it did track from just to the west of Memorial Stadium, cutting a path to the northeast across the city, finally exiting on the east side of the city. And that tornado, or those tornadoes, stayed on the ground almost to Waurika, Oklahoma, because in the weeks that followed, they found photographs, mail, all sorts of things that had been blown by the tornado all the way from Wichita Falls to Waurika, which is 30 miles up the road.
I'd given some thought to this. Well, I've done it on many occasions, but just this morning, I was thinking about it. For me, it was just a typical work day. And for some reason, I left the office maybe 4 o'clock that afternoon. And, I was trying to figure out, well, why didn't you leave an hour early from work? But all day long, maybe it was because I was busy, I didn't give any thought to a threat of a tornado or bad weather, or this rain. And like I say, I just did my job. I left, and I sat on the couch, and I was tired, and I go, hey, I'll take me just a short nap, I got so many things to do with the kids and helping my wife and stuff. And when I was dozing that little bit, is when Joe Brown called me and just, hey, we've had a fatality. Well, I naturally would always just respond and go. But many, many times over the years, I've thought, was there anything like that in the forecast? I don't know, and I don't guess I'll ever know. But it sure turned out to be a whole lot more than just a regular day at work, and then go home. I'd really like to know if we had a chance of bad weather forecast that day, and me just being so wrapped up in what I was doing that I didn't give it any thought. Think about it. How many years had it been since the last time we had a tornado? So, you just don't think about it, which I do now. I'm addicted to the Weather Channel and can give you a 15-day forecast, but back then we didn't have access to it. If you didn't see a weather report in the paper, a forecast, or catch something on the news, on TV before you went to work, you just didn't know. Maybe somebody somewhere along the line will call me up and say, hey Lee, this was the forecast for that day. But let me tell you, there's not a person that lived through April 10th, 1979 that's not going to remember it for the rest of their lives.
We may be lulled into a sense of false security because we haven't had a major tornado, or really a tornado of any kind in Wichita Falls, for going on 40 years. But that's not to say it couldn't happen, and certainly people need to be aware. The good news is that nowadays we have a much greater chance of having earlier warning of it and better warning of it than we had in 1979. I mean, the weather technology has become so much more sophisticated. The ability to predict the track of a tornado and so forth is so much better. And the availability of that information to the public is so much better. Certainly you have the television stations, now you have the internet. I get weather alerts on my phone. There's really no good reason for anybody not to be aware of a weather danger nowadays. And I think most people in this part of the country who've been around here for a while know what to do. You go to the cellar. If you don't have a cellar, you go to an interior room. They know the safety precautions to take. So in the event that we had another tornado event, hopefully not as many people would be injured. Hopefully you wouldn't have the death toll you had. Nothing's going to stop the destruction from happening if it were to happen again. But knock on wood, maybe our time is still 200 years down the road.
45 would lose their lives in Wichita Falls, 11 in Vernon, and 3 in Lawton, Oklahoma.